this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Owning a home is full of surprises. Some wonderful, some not so much. And when something breaks, it can feel like the whole day unravels. That's why HomeServe exists. For as little as $4.99 a month, you'll always have someone to call. A trusted professional ready to help, bringing peace of mind to 4.5 million homeowners nationwide. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on what your kids are spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/iHeart.
Body Bags with JoScott Morgan. I've been to 2 locations over the course of my life where presidential assassinations took place. I got to say, I was left surprised by both. I don't know how this kind of figures into the calculus, if you will, or what my expectation was. I went to Dallas and stood just adjacent to what they term as the sniper's nest on Dealey Plaza in the Texas School Book Depository there. Looked out that window and I could see the road stretching on before me. And what really kind of stood out to me, having watched newsreels for years and years relative to the Kennedy assassination, I always imagined that area was going to be really, really big, massive. It wasn't. It was kind of condensed, if you will. Now, I actually went down and when traffic wasn't approaching me, I went out and stood on the X where they claimed that the fatal shot was sustained. But it seemed small. However, I went to Ford's Theater as well. Other than, the building being very, very old and probably having one of the best museums I've ever been in, period, down in the basement. The space of Ford's Theater was so much larger than I expected. And as I stood there and I looked, and of course it's not necessarily configured like it was at that time. They had to do a lot of restorative work and repairs and all those sorts of things, but the approximations of where everything is, you can only imagine that as a single shot rings out, and the sound of maybe ripping bunting as a spur is caught in it, and John Wilkes Booth falls to the stage below, it would echo in that space. Everybody frozen in time. It's hard to take the measure when great men fall. But today, we're going to talk about the assassination and autopsy of our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. I'm JoScott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave Mack, my friend, senior crime reporter with Crime Online. When I proposed this to you, I don't know if you thought that I was out of my mind or if you thought that, wow, this is going to be really intriguing. I was fascinated by the prospect. That's why I wanted to do this. I've always been interested in exactly what was found relative to Abe Lincoln and his mortal remains. How did they go about assessing what had happened? And so much has been written about Lincoln. I think that probably out of every president, there's been more books written than any other president we've ever had. And they still continue to be written today. But, you know, when you get down to it, he was a man. He was a man that died at the hand of another man. And he was felled like so many other people have died in our country at the end of the muzzle of a weapon. I just wanted to explore that. Were you kind of surprised when I pitched this to you?
My first thought when you suggested doing it, I thought, okay, I know nothing. I mean, other than the shot from John Wilkes Booth, I am totally ignorant of his death and what took place in those hours between the time he was shot and the time he died. I know plenty of rumors, I guess, or theories of things that happened, because no matter what happens when you talk about Abraham Lincoln and the assassination, there are so many rabbit holes to take a tour of, from conspiracy theories to, what really happened, which, by the way, was a conspiracy. I remember mentioning this one day on my radio show, saying, we'll talk about the conspiracy surrounding the assassination of President Lincoln. And I had people that were mad. They thought I was just muddying the water, and I was shocked that people don't know what really happened. Okay. So when you mentioned covering it, I thought, okay, this is one big part of the story that most of us don't know and cannot understand. What really happened when President Lincoln was shot in a public place at night with an audience by an actor? I mean, there's a lot going on in that moment. You're a scholar, you're a forensic genius, you are all of these things. And I'm going to be honest, I'm waiting to hear what really happened, the truth of what took place, medically speaking, with President Lincoln.
What's shocking to me, I guess I'm taking this in measure compared to the way we see things now. I've been to presidential inaugurations. I've been in the presence of presidents. I almost got T-boned one day in downtown Atlanta many years ago by Al Gore's detail that were
Wow.
were blowing red lights going to CNN. And I was actually returning from a death scene. I just worked, and I was down by CNN Center, and I could hear sirens, but I wasn't expected, because in downtown Atlanta, you don't expect to see people driving like really, really fast on the streets. First off, the streets are horrible. They're real bumpy and uneven. Not in that case. And there before me flew the motorcade of Al Gore when he was vice president. And that's a vice president. I think that the thing that many people ask, or many people have questions about when it comes to President Lincoln, is access and opportunity. Abraham Lincoln was known for his kind of folksy way. And back during those times, just measure this by what happens today, Dave. If an individual wanted to come and see the president at the White House, all they merely had to do was, it was referred to as presenting your card. And you would knock on the front door of the White House. You would show up. The door would be answered by a servant, and you would hand your card, like a business card, over to the person that greeted you at the door, and they would announce you. Now, you might not get to see the president. It's stated that there would people be standing around milling about and waiting, but there were people that got in to see him. There were really no appointments that were needed. You could just take your shot, no pun intended, and see him. And, of course, that night at Ford's Theater, I think one of the lingering questions guarding the president and what happened that night, lo these many years, how did Booth get access to the president, to his box? And it's one thing to stand outside of the president's box, because let me kind of paint the picture for you. If you're, and having been there, if you're in Ford's Theater, and I know I'm going to say this wrong to all the people that have theater backgrounds, so forgive me in advance, but if you're standing center stage, if you will, in the audience, there's an orchestra pit right at the forward portion in front of the stage. They kind of sit, down, and the stage itself is pitched, which I was struck by. The stage itself gradually rises from the front to the rear, and then it comes to this big crescendo where you can see that there is a tremendous elevation change. It's not like it is today. The stage is completely different from the way they have it reassembled down there. I was struck by that. But up to your right, in Ford's Theater, there is what they called a box up there. It was the presidential box, and it's still festooned today. They have bunting, red, white, and blue bunting that's up there, and there's a portrait of President Washington hanging on the front of it. They had prepped it that way that night, knowing, and this is the key, knowing that the president was going to come. It was actually announced that he was going to be there.
Joe, I actually found out they had flyers printed up announcing that he would be there and what time he would be there.
This is fascinating because this is only 4 days after Lee had surrendered at Appomattox. And people have described those times, if you can imagine, coming through this tremendous darkness. And it is a darkness that none of us can comprehend, I don't think, of that war. In the movie Lincoln, Spielberg's Lincoln, character of Lincoln is played by Daniel Day-Lewis, and he makes the comment describing the Civil War is, I want to put an end to this pestilential war. I love that term. It just encompasses everything. Can you imagine all of a sudden you get this news? All they had were telegraph and horseback. Suddenly the clouds begin to lift. Everybody's in a celebratory mood. And even reports from the audience that night said that there was a sense of levity in the audience, that people, it was celebratory. And people were very, I don't even know if happy is an insufficient term. Relief, I think.
Oddly, though, even at that time, Lee had surrendered to Grant 4 days earlier, but Tennessee was still fighting.
Yeah, there were still battles going on. I don't know that the surrender in North Carolina, which followed the surrender at Appomattox, had taken place even to this point. And still out west, you had skirmishes going on out in Texas. So it hadn't actually come to an end. Things moved a lot slower back then than they do now. Going back even decades prior to this, the Battle of New Orleans and the War of 1812 was actually fought after the end of hostilities.
Right.
So that's kind of it gives you an idea of how slow things moved. And they didn't have telegraph then, but it was a different pace. And with that different pace, you didn't have the rigor that you have now when it comes to presidential security.
But you mentioned somebody being able to walk up to the White House, knock on the door, and present your card and have access to the White House and possibly the president. So at Ford's Theater, where he's in the presidential box, where everybody's been told he's going to be, it was not necessarily guarded. It has been said that it was essentially unguarded.
And probably one of the most infamous characters in this whole tragedy was this fellow John Parker, who was actually one of the original members of the first established police force for D.C., what we now know as D.C. Police. He was actually one of the first members that were hired. And we'll break it down. He was a drunk. He had been reprimanded multiple times, had been brought before board over and over and over again, and had never been terminated from employment. Out of all of the people in the world, he was actually assigned to protect the president. Now, this is before the days where you had a Secret Service presence taking care of everything. These guys that work with Secret Service now, they do advanced planning so far out that I think a lot of people would be shocked to know everything that goes into that protection detail. And back then, when the Secret Service was initially established, it had nothing to do with presidential security. That's something that they inherited years later. There would be 2 more presidents assassinated after Lincoln before it kind of clicked with them that, hey, you probably need a full-time detail. And back then, they were known to do counterfeit investigation. This John Parker character was assigned to Lincoln, and he would be found sleeping on duty many times. He liked to, as the older generation used to say, he liked to pull the cork. And even that night, after everyone got settled in the box, up to the right aspect or to the right of the stage, there was a chair for him out there that he would be seated in. And you got kind of two doors that you have to walk through in order to get access to the actual box. He would not have seen inside of the box once he was stationed there. It was at some point in time he was seen going down, leaving, chatting with the carriage driver for the president and Mrs. Lincoln, then adjourning over to a bar that was called The Star. And I've seen it. It's immediately adjacent as you're facing Ford's Theater. It's to the right. And he began pulling a cork over there during this period of time when the play was going on, re-enters the theater, they believe, and finds himself a choice seat down in the audience so that he can enjoy the play. So the president is completely unguarded. Then enters John Wilkes Booth. His day, he would have been, I guess, from a movie star perspective, he's Ben Affleck or a Matt Damon, or he's
a Baldwin brother.
Well,
because of his brother Edwin being an actor.
Yeah, hey, you're absolutely right. And their dad, Julius, had immigrated from Great Britain. Very well known. I mean, this was a theater family. They were known, and he was known. He was regarded as very handsome, spent a lot of time at Ford's Theater, but he was just full of vitriol when it came to the president. He blamed the president for everything. He supported, quote unquote, the Southern cause, but never quite found the guts to go and sign up and stand a post and shoulder a weapon. Never could find that within himself to do. But yet he planned several attempts. I think at one point in time he's going to try to kidnap the president and ransom him.
That plan had to be changed, obviously, for all kinds of reasons. But you mentioned he didn't have the guts to shoulder a weapon. He didn't have the guts to man up and actually fight for what he claims he believes. But he did think by doing this, he would become a hero in the South, which plays into what really happened after the fact.
As a Southerner, I have to admit, I think that Lincoln was about bringing the country back together, healing. I think that this was the worst possible thing that could have ever have happened. He did damage to the South that would probably rival the damage that had actually occurred during the war when the North had an opportunity to visit vengeance upon the South. Boy, they did it, and they did it in spades, man. I mean, they just wrecked the South for years and years, and it was because of this act of this person. People were sick of war. They didn't want anything else to do with it. That night back in 1865 in that old theater, when John Wilkes Booth pulled that Philadelphia Deringer from his pocket, he pulled that hammer back and he let fly that round, he changed history.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Now I'd like to introduce you to Meaningful Beauty, the famed skincare brand created by iconic supermodel Cindy Crawford. It's her secret to absolutely gorgeous skin. Meaningful Beauty makes powerful and effective skincare simple, and it's loved by millions of women. It's formulated for all ages and all skin tones and types, and it's designed to work as a complete skincare system, leaving your skin feeling soft, smooth, and nourished. I recommend starting with Cindy's full regimen, which contains all 5 of her best-selling products, including the amazing youth-activating melon serum. This next-generation serum has the power of melon leaf stem cell technology. It's melon leaf stem cells encapsulated for freshness and released onto the skin to support a visible reduction in the appearance of wrinkles. With thousands of glowing 5-star reviews, why not give it a try? Subscribe today and you can get the amazing Meaningful Beauty system for just $49.95. That includes our introductory 5-piece system, free gifts, free shipping, and a 60-day money-back guarantee. All of that available at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Are you a fraud-paying American? It's a fact that 1 in 4 honest, hard-working, tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity theft. With LifeLock Identity Theft Protection, though, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, and get you your money back. Last year, the IRS flagged over $16 billion in refunds for identity fraud. That's billions of dollars that could come from your salary, overtime, or second job. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second for your personal information and alerts you to threats you could easily miss on your own. And if your information does fall into the wrong hands, only LifeLock has U.S.-based restoration specialists who are backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. Because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Visit LifeLock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at LifeLock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
You think about things in minute detail, particularly when it comes to the assassination of a president. The mere action of placing the pad of your right index finger onto that smooth metallic surface of what otherwise would be known as a beautiful and elegant weapon, and engaging that trigger mechanism, that one motion, that one initiation, that one action, set in motion things that I don't know that we have ever recovered from, Dave.
I think that what took place in the months leading up to the assassination, from the summer of 1864, when John Wilkes Booth was gathering amongst him some people who felt the same way he did, or at least leaned that way, up until the point of the assassination, I think that whole planning stage and the execution that took place damaged our country. And there are places still felt to this day. I think Winston County, Alabama comes to mind. If you ever have a chance, and as long as we're talking history, there's a place called Looney's Tavern in Winston County. And at Looney's Tavern, the county decided to not be involved in the Civil War. And they decided they were going to be neutral, Switzerland, right here in Winston County, Alabama. And to this day, because they remain neutral, if you go into Winston County, you can tell how the road changes from the minute you go into Winston County, because they don't get support from the state of Alabama the way other counties do, because they refused to be involved. That's how far out. I mean, it is 2023, and we're talking about something that happened in 1861, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But anyway, I had a question for you, because I'm not a gun expert, Joe. I don't know that much about what they do. I'm looking at everything surrounding the assassination and what John Wilkes Booth was going to use. He couldn't walk into the theater carrying a rifle. It had to be a small gun. He knew as an actor he would have access to areas within the theater that the regular patron might not. So he knows he can get up there, but he still has to have a weapon that will do what he needs it to do. But it has to be small enough that he can get in there with it. So what are we talking about with the gun that he used? Was it didn't have a magazine. It only had one shot, right?
Yeah, it did. It's quite a beautiful weapon when you see it. And I've seen this weapon. The weapon, you remember I'd mentioned the theater museum, Ford's Theater. It's in the basement. And look, I recommend anybody, if you're in D.C., go to Ford's Theater. It's one of those places that you got to pay to get into. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's free in D.C. That's the beauty of it if you're a history person. But Ford's Theater, you got to pay. It's worth every dime you're going to spend. Trust me. This weapon, it looks like it's floating in the air, Dave, when you see it, but it's pegged up there with a couple of really tiny little nails and hanging, suspended in the air, and you can see it. And what's really kind of fascinating about it is that you can move around this thing and you can actually stare right down the muzzle of it. I mean, when I say stare down the muzzle, you can stare down the muzzle so effectively that you can actually see the lands and grooves, which are the twists that are built into this barrel. I think many folks believe that this is almost like an old-fashioned smoothbore musket. It's not. It was, back then, it was cutting-edge technology. It's referred to as a Philadelphia Deringer. It had a walnut stock, has a walnut stock, and it's beautifully embossed. This style of weapon is something that people will refer to as a poker pistol, which is interesting. Also as a pocket pistol, a palm pistol, a belly gun. And it was meant, as you had stated, for concealment purposes. And the effective range on it is very limited, very, very limited. Once you get outside of probably about 10 feet, you might as well be throwing rocks at that point in time. But the reason this thing is referred to as a poker pistol is that the distance across a poker table that this thing would have been deployed in would be sufficient to the task if you were firing at somebody across the table. I don't know if they're cheating you at cards or whatever the case might be. But here's what's interesting. When you look down the muzzle of this weapon, you remember I talked about lands and grooves. For its time, this particular weapon had a left-hand twist, which, when you think about lands and grooves, which are those kind of spiraling marks that run down the length of the barrel to add stability to the round, it's kind of like throwing a football. The reason really good football players are great, or quarterbacks, that is if they can get a tight spiral on a ball, it maintains energy. Okay, the bullet is spinning, the football is spinning, and it maintains, it holds on to what energy that it can, and it stays on target. Whereas if you fire something down a smooth bore, that projectile is kind of rattling down the barrel, if you will, and it has no kind of predictability to it. Now, there are parameters for this thing. First off, you have to consider the size of the round. You have to consider the amount of powder or propellant that would have been used.
What would it have looked like? Would it have been like a bullet like we know today?
No.
Or would it be a round ball? And where would the powder be?
It's been known under several different calibers. And remember, when we say caliber, we're talking about the diameter in inches around the circumference of the round itself. So this is, some people call it a 44 caliber. Some people call it a 45 caliber. That is the Philadelphia Deringer. It was a 44 caliber. That means 0.44 inches in diameter. Okay, the muzzle of the weapon. Booth loaded this thing with a 0.41. So he didn't get the maximum power, because as it's packed in there, and you have to use, if people have seen what a ramrod is, it's the attachment. It looks like a rod that's generally held beneath the length of the barrel on a weapon that is what's referred to as a muzzle loader. So you have to put the round down the barrel from the open end of the barrel and pack it down in there in order to get this thing to initiate. Well, he used a caliber of bullet, which was a 41 caliber. The bullet is actually smaller. What you want is, primarily, you want a round that is going to be tightly fitted in there, because that is going to take advantage of this muzzle, of this blast of the propellant. As the firing sequence is initiated, you're going to transfer more energy, that's kinetic energy, to this round as it travels out of the end of this muzzle and gets to target.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Hi, I'm Cindy Crawford, and I'm the founder of Meaningful Beauty. When Dr. Sabah and I decided to do a skincare line together, he said to me, we are going to give women meaningful beauty. And I said, that's exactly right. We want to give women meaningful beauty, which means each and every product is meaningful. It has a reason to exist. It's efficacious. You're going to get results. And then you just go out and live your life.
Meaningful beauty. Confidence is beautiful. Learn more at meaningfulbeauty.com.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on what your kids are spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/iHeart.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
You have to preload this thing and have it loaded in your pocket. Generally, the hammer is forward, and the hammer is the big mechanism. If you'll take a look at this thing online, it's elegant when you see it. The hammer mechanism is that thing that has to be driven forward by the trigger. When you pull the trigger, the hammer slams forward and initiates the firing sequence. And there's a couple of components here. There's actually what's referred to as a nipple in the hammer housing, which has a little firing port on the top. So you have to take a percussion cap, which has got an explosive in it. It's brass. You set it on the nipple, okay? And so when the trigger's pulled and the hammer slams forward, it sends this little spark down this little portal inside of the nipple, and it travels down until it strikes, that spark strikes the actual propellant or powder inside of the muzzle that you've already preloaded. That explosion goes off, and so the bullet then travels out of the end of the barrel and heads toward the target. So pull a trigger now, for instance, on a semi-automatic weapon, you don't really get the sense of any kind of delay, even though there is in a millisecond when the firing pin strikes that primer cap that we have that's built into a bullet now, or to live ammo. And that firing sequence all initiates inside the barrel, not with this. What would have happened is, as Booth took this weapon out of his pocket, he would have had to have cocked the hammer externally, and it's really high. It looks like it sits about 1 to 2 inches above the top level of the barrel, the backside of the barrel. He would have pulled it back, and it would have clicked twice. You have a half cock, and then you have a full cock. In order to fire it, you got to pull it all the way back, so it'd go click, click. Okay? He probably would have done this before he entered the area where Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln and Major Rathbone and his date were seated. He would have walked up to the back of Lincoln and pointed this thing at his head, and we can get into that in a moment. But when he initiated this firing sequence, Dave, you would have heard a click as the thing is fired, and then you would have heard a small explosion. It would have been poof, like that, and then boom. So it's like poof, boom, like this. What happens is that externally, that hammer slams forward on that primer cap, initiates a tiny explosion, and that tiny explosion initiates a bigger explosion, which is the propellant, and it drives that round out of the end of that barrel. Now, today, if you were to try to get an idea of the energy of this weapon, okay, in today's standards, it would be probably the equivalent of our highest powered air gun that we have.
Wow.
And the further away you are from target, the more diminished the power is. So you have to be up close. And of course, Wilkes was close. He was probably within inches of Lincoln's head when he pulled that trigger and this whole firing sequence initiated.
When that firing sequence initiated, the click, okay, he squeezes the trigger and the beginning, it starts. Would there have been enough time for President Lincoln to react to hearing that click, the trigger is pulled, for him to react and begin to turn before the bullet came out?
That's the thing about this. I'm so glad you brought this up. As we've stated, and everybody knows, John Wilkes Booth was an actor, and he had been present for this play so many times. He knew some of the people that were in the play. And not only did he know that, he knew, because it's a comedy, all right? He knew when laughter was going to rise and fall. And he timed it as a line is delivered that during the period of this play that elicits the loudest roar of laughter that can be experienced. According to what we know about the nature of the injury that President Lincoln sustained, he apparently was leaning forward, perhaps, okay, with his head kind of pitched downward, all right? And some people believe he wasn't looking at the stage, but he was probably looking in the orchestra pit, which is in front of the stage. There maybe some instrument caught his attention. When you're around an orchestra, and Lincoln would have been around a lot of music because every time he walks in a room, somebody's going to play Hail to the Chief. There's still this fascination about a group of people getting together and playing instruments, and they're playing the soundtrack essentially for this play. Some people believe that he's looking down at the orchestra pit, and this kind of dictates the orientation of his head relative to the firing line. But Booth knew enough about the play so that when laughter began to rise, he knew that his movements, the cocking of that weapon, and any comment he would make would be drowned out. He knew that anybody else that might be occupying that area up there, their attention would be drawn to the stage. And the idea is to get the eyes away from you if you're the assassin. And to a great degree, he had planned this perfectly in that sense. Didn't plan his escape very well, but he planned this to this point. He knew that this was the best time. So when he fired that round into the back of the president's head, he had one attempt to do it. Here's a fascinating thing about these Philadelphia Derringers, as they're referred to. You could buy them in pairs. And as a matter of fact, you could buy, I think this is correct, you could actually buy a pair of these things for $24, which was a tremendous amount of money. But Booth is very successful, would have been considered in that day wealthy, probably. You could actually buy in pairs, and it stands to reason that you would want it, because if one round was not effective, you've got a second or a fallback weapon to fire as well, because these are not semi-automatic. It's a painstaking practice to have to go through and load it. And the way the loading actually took place is that you would measure out the number of grains that it would take, grains of propellant, which this is a black powder weapon, so it's very messy. Very, very messy. It's not like smokeless powder like we have today. You put the powder down into the barrel, so you have to lift the muzzle so it's pointed skyward. You pour the powder down in there, okay? Then you put a cloth patch down on top of the powder. Then the ball, which is a ball, it's a ball of lead, all right? It's not the kind of conical shaped bullets that we have now that have points on them, okay? You'd asked that earlier. This is actually a ball that is now rammed down in there with this tiny little ramrod that's attached on the base of this Philadelphia Derringer. And the bullet is what's referred to as seated at that time. You get it tightly packed in there so that when you're you're walking up and down the streets, or you're riding on horseback, or whatever it is, bullet's not going to fall out. You have to have it tightly seated in there so that when you do use this thing and you cock it and you set that action in motion, you're guaranteed, first off, you're going to still have a round in there. It's not going to fall off in your pocket. And then secondly, that it's tightly secured enough so that you're going to get maximum pressure when that explosion takes place. Hey friends, if that sounded like it ended kind of abruptly, there's a part 2. Please join us for part 2 of the episode regarding Abraham Lincoln, his death, and autopsy. I'm JoScott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Are you a fraud-paying American? 1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity fraud. With LifeLock, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Last year, billions in refunds were stolen. Could be from your salary, overtime, or second job. Gone. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim, because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
At CVS, it matters that we're not just in your community, but that we're part of it. It matters that we're here for you when you need us, day or night. And we want everyone to feel welcomed and rewarded. It matters that CVS is here to fill your prescriptions and here to fill your craving for a tasty and, healthy snack. At CVS, we're proud to serve your community because we believe where you get your medicine matters. So visit us at cvs.com or just come by our store. We can't wait to meet you. Store hours vary by location.
You ever wonder how far an EV can take you on one charge? Well, most people drive about 40 miles a day, which means you can do all daily stuff no problem. Go to work, grab the kids at school, get the groceries, and still have enough charge to visit your in-laws in the next county. But they don't need to know that. And the best part, you won't have to buy gas at all. The way forward is electric. Explore EVs that fit your life at electricforall.org.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.